Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the bi-weekly podcast focusing on all elements of the Microsoft Cloud, from Azure through M365, Copilot, etc., etc. This week, slight change if planned, because we're actually recording this on a Wednesday as opposed to a Friday. So if anything happens between now and at least Friday morning that is important that isn't covered on here, and you're wondering why isn't that covered, that is the reason why. But anyway, we still do have a range of topics to cover off this week. And David's got two in particular, one around a Microsoft research paper, which is talking about what's next in AI, followed by some news around Anthropic and MCP, or Model Context Protocol, which I believe has been given away as a open source, or at least given away to the community. But David will cover that off in more detail because I've missed that piece of news. Cyrus will be deep diving into Intune Suite in E3, E5 licenses and supporting a blog that he's got on LinkedIn around that at the moment. And I will be continuing I'm not even quite sure what the right word is, my journey with GitHub Copilot usage this week. So I've had a couple of interesting scenarios that have sort of reared its head over the course of the last couple of days that I thought I would share with everybody here. Anyway, without further ado, as I always like to hand it off to either David or Cyrus to do this, so it's not just you listening to me waffling on for the first however many minutes of the podcast, I will pass it across to David this week to kick us off with that Microsoft research paper.
Exciting. I am the favorite. Thank you, Richard. And yeah, I guess, for both of these, AI has moved so fast over the last couple of years, and I confess, I think I find it difficult sometimes to tell the difference between the genuine progress and the dare I say, the repeated storytelling. Something we touched on in the last podcast, right? And from Ignite and how much of that is just rebranding, replaying of existing stuff, just being brought together. And I think this is why the Microsoft research article stood out to me, because for a change, it's not trying to announce like another massive breakthrough, or is trying to make all these predictions in terms of what 2026 is going to be. I think it gives a refreshing, sort of grounded view of where these underlying capabilities have actually now reached a turning point where they've been building and building, I guess, in the background. And I think this now shows how these different capabilities are beginning to work together in a bit more of a coherent manner. And the themes themselves aren't actually new. I think what is interesting is the highlighted maturity and convergence, and this is true for both the things I'm going to talk about, where the article covers sort of several long-running trends, themes, where they're all starting to combine to drive this value. So if I touch on some of them. So you've got in the article, the research article, it talks about AI in science. So you get this sense that it's shifting from sort of promising research to actual usable capability. And you see scientists are starting to rely on models, not just for this analysis thing, but for proposing experiments and filtering probabilities and then helping to decide what to test next. And I think that's interesting because it's come up with a customer that I'm with as well. If you look at how do you cohort a particular group of people, a lot of that is very human-led today, and being able to use models to maybe have a different perspective on that helps then turn it into like this. The tooling becomes more practical rather than experimental. So that and the agents then, as you're finding, Richard, right, as you've been talking about, moving from these prototypes into real workflows, and the move from sort of these constrained demos to sort of true automation is a bit of a step change. And those agents now are operating across multiple systems. They obviously can hold context longer. They can execute longer workflows with real organizational value. So super interesting on that front. And then from the biology and materials side of things, they've both crossed, I think, an important accuracy threshold. So the work before has been, again, in terms of, wow, look at this thing on what it could be, but now they've got models that can reason with enough fidelity that they're becoming part of genuine research pipelines again. So it's not speculative, it's not an experiment. They're being used in production. And again, infrastructure innovation being, I think it was Ignite, wasn't it, where they're talking about cooling and all the new cooling capabilities that are being driven through both through the use of AI, because there's enough commercial pressure now to force a change in terms of how the compute, cooling, and energy efficiencies that are needed. You need those new architectures. So it's kind of a virtuous loop there in terms of AI is enabling it, but it's also driving it in equal measure. So I think that's super interesting. And then as we keep going about, as everyone keeps going on about, the software development side of things being reshaped again in practice, not in theory. And I think moving, as you're finding, from writing code to describing intent, in the most part, right, the tools are getting better and better and better on each iteration to be able to do that. So I think, take all those things together, the research article shows that I guess the next phase isn't about lots and lots of brand new concepts, but about the existing capabilities becoming more usable, more reliable, and more scalable all at the same time. And for me, that's what makes the article interesting. And then I think if we look at the second one, the Anthropic announcement, what fits nicely into this conversation, right? It's given the maturing of AI capabilities, what then becomes important, which was the last thing I just spoke about, which is the infrastructure bit. And we need that to mature either fast or at the same time. And the MCP timeline, and I hadn't read this right, I hadn't realized how quickly this has flipping matured. So like the first MCP specification landed in late 2024, right? So just about a year ago, right? And that had support in Claude. Then within a few months, had sort of adoption from some developer tools being presented at engineering events, all that stuff. And the people are sort of, ooh, it's exciting. Like there's a few thousand public MCP servers running. But then through, I guess, early 2025, protocol gains more features, which makes it more useful for real work, as you've been finding, Richard. I mean, you've written your own as well, right? So, and including things that matter, like stuff like enterprise authentication and better streaming, and it gets to the point where okay, well now Google picks, Microsoft picks, AWS picks it up, and all of these start to make a broad commitment, I guess, to collaborate around what this thing MCP actually is. And at that point, it stops looking like an Anthropic idea and starts looking like common infrastructure. So you get the theme that I'm talking about here. But then by mid 2025, ecosystem grows. You've got thousands more MCP servers, lots of developer events that are actually centered around just this thing. And, we see incremental improvements in security and how you can ensure structured outputs. Claude launched an MCP directory, which then, is another sign that this has become like an established thing rather than experimental. Bearing in mind, we're not even a year in yet. Right? Oh my God. And then we have, little earlier this year, the enterprise hosting that people are providing, cloud providers are offering, and you've got the official MCP registry that goes live. So at that point, MCP usage is measured in tens of millions of SDK downloads per month. And when you think against that backdrop, right, and how far it's come, and I just have such awe for people that manage to create these things. And then, when you see it grow at that pace and that speed, it's just amazing. But anyway, against that backdrop, the Anthropic's decision, I think it was yesterday, I think I saw it on the news, come through yesterday, to move MCP into a new agentic AI foundation. So it's not part of the existing sort of open foundations. Is super. It means it's no longer just a feature owned by one company, right? And that's super important because it's already become part of the basic wiring, right, for agents. So, placing it under, I guess, a neutral foundation, which sits within the Linux Foundation, gives it both, I guess, stable governance, but also allows organizations to participate, without concerns about ownership or lock-in. And that, when you're talking about something that's as ubiquitous as it is, that becomes really, really important, I think, to many people. And also something called Goose, which I can't remember off the top of my mind. I wrote it down. Is also at the same time, and the agents.md that OpenAI have, which is the specification for defining what an agent is and what it does. So all those three things have sort of dropped at the same time, which gives you that entire framework for building this stuff. So you get these clear patterns for how agents should behave, how they should interact with systems, and as a whole, that hopefully will help the whole ecosystem move faster. And I think, I think we're all agreed, agentic AI will never scale if every model and every vendor and, people create their own way of connecting to tools and data. And I think having it in this neutral setting gives us a common integration layer. It reduces this fragmentation that we see, simplifies development, all the things that we care about that makes this a predictable thing to use. And as I said at the top, when you pull these two stories that I spoke about together, there's a consistent theme there, right? The concepts are not new. They're existing things that are becoming more and more mature as as time progresses, bearing in mind going a year. So I mean, my God. But anyway, and that core foundation, the open plumbing, is where this starts, I think, being a real ecosystem that people can work with rather than just a bunch of isolated breakthroughs. So I thought that was super interesting. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I knew MCP was a relatively new technology. I hadn't realized it was only a year old. So it's quite interesting that I'm on the edge of the new stuff that's coming out here for a change, because I'm now up to 3 MCP servers. So it's incrementing on a weekly basis these days. Although I will combine it into one at some point. Just for ease of use. And again, that is primarily for my benefit, but it is in my public GitHub repo if anybody wants to go and have a look at what I've done around that. And there was another point I think you made in there which was interesting. So I don't know whether any of you guys watched the AWS keynote.
I didn't. I meant to, but I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was prompted to by a colleague to do like a comparison internally, which I haven't actually published internally. I've published it externally, but I haven't published it internally around the two different keynotes.
Yeah.
And I found it really interesting how Microsoft were very much focused around, hey, look, we've got these agents and we've got these guardrails for these agents, and this is how we're going to be working with the agents. And they barely mentioned the sort of infrastructure layer at all. I don't even think they really mentioned the models that much either.
No,
I don't think, if memory serves me correct.
bots, I think was the phrase particularly used. Right?
Yeah,
so
and it was very much, work IQ, agent, whatever, and M365 Copilot, blah, blah, blah. It was all the agent-based stuff, minus the cringeworthy T-shirt thing, which we talked about on the last episode. Whereas the AWS one, and again, I didn't get all the way through the keynote because work got in the way as usual. But certainly the first, hour or so was all around infrastructure. It was all about, hey, look, we've got the servers, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the connectivity, we've got the GPUs to support those workloads. They didn't really talk about agents at all. It was, hey, we're providing you with the foundational components to build your models. And they talked about that. They've got some new models. They've got some new chips, Trainium 3, if I remember correctly, from the chips. And I think it was Nova for the models. But again, it was really interesting the way that AWS focused purely on, hey, we've got the foundational components that enables you to do stuff. And Microsoft was almost skipping over that bit, perhaps with the assumption that everybody knows that they've got the foundational pieces to do it, and we're focusing purely on the agents. So AWS was as I say, it was sort of the foundational components, models plus cost. Cost came up quite frequently around that. So obviously that's one of their big plays is the cost competitiveness of their services. Whereas Microsoft was, hey, agent.
And it's really interesting. I think the last, I've managed to watch the last two keynotes, the AWS ones, and it just felt like all round they did a better job in terms of that keynote. And I've somebody asked me, well, why? And I was like, I can't actually put my finger on it, but something resonated more. Now, it might be a personal thing because I'm very much infrastructure dude, right? And they do tend to focus a lot on the infrastructure side of things. So maybe it resonates more with me, but just something about the way they do the storytelling almost works better. And if I could bottle it, I would love to. Or maybe you guys can. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I agree. That was the first AWS keynote I'd watched, and I was more interested. Sorry to say it to Judson and the chap from LinkedIn, whose name I can't remember, who were doing the main parts of the keynote. I preferred the AWS one. It resonated much better with me than sitting there talking about agents. And again, I mean, I shouldn't say it because we are Microsoft friendly and we should be talking about how Microsoft stuff enables us to do things, not necessarily just saying, hey, AWS is better. It's not, but I found it very interesting. They were showing some agent workflows that, I don't know, this could be just me, but it didn't really grab my ear and go, that's really impressive. The stuff they were doing with Zava or whatever the company was called. I'm like, well, that's not that sort of cutting edge.
That's because
perhaps I'm just being really cynical and being a really downer on a Wednesday morning. But that was how I felt when I was watching it. Again, perhaps it played out better in the room than it did remotely.
You should buy the domain, the Amazon blog. Because now you have the Microsoft blog. We should buy the domain, the Amazon blog soon, because I think we are all agreeing on going to.
I'm surprised I've managed to actually keep that. So for listeners, viewers that don't know, so I do have the MicrosoftCloudblog.com domain, and I was talking to somebody who said, "Well, how did you get that?" And I said, "Well, I've had it for like 15 years. Don't do much with it, and I only pay like, I don't know, $10 a year for the domain name registration." So I don't know. If anybody wants to make an offer on it, come and speak to me. I'm quite happy.
You see, he's moving to Amazon soon, Richard. Now, I had to say I didn't watch the keynotes live, the previous ones, but it's always like, because my network is full of, especially in France, they're more Amazon than Microsoft, and the feeling that you could not describe, David, is it's extremely more mature the way they prepare. It's expert to expert, and Microsoft feels more marketing, so they use a lot of hype, and this is a new thing, and then people then come and criticize, and then you have the MVP people who try to connect the dots. But Amazon, they established, they hear, they know they don't have to convince anyone. They just said, this is what we build in secret, check it out. So that's the same feeling. And it's good to mention that for Microsoft. The same discussion we had with the Contoso. Why did you remove Contoso? I'm still upset. You see, it doesn't feel mature. It's like 20 years later, you still question the foundation of what people can rely on. Anyway, sorry, it was my 2 cents on that.
No worries, Cyrus. It's absolutely fine. So yeah, and that actually covered one of the topics I was going to talk about in my section, which was the difference between the Ignite and the reInvent keynotes. So that sort of nicely covered that off. I don't need to worry about it anymore.
Super.
So the other bits that I was going to talk about was, again, my continuing experience in inverted commas of using GitHub Copilot in my vibe coding capacity. So again, not sitting down with the code window open, writing code, but basically just having the chat window open and talking to it, I suppose. So I had 2 interesting occurrences this week. Cyrus is aware of one because I sort of talked him through this on Monday. And I'll share it with you. And again, I can't share the screen because I'm not able to figure out how to make the chat window in VS Code a bigger font or actually sort of a little bit more easily shareable or readable. Perhaps by design, I don't know. It's also really annoying.
You need to install Zoomit. Come on.
Yeah, possibly. And it's also really annoying. They don't timestamp the conversations. I don't know why. That just frustrates the hell out of me. So the conversations aren't timestamped. But anyway, so bit of background. I was using GitHub Copilot to create a graph that was just supposed to just show an incremental curve in effect, going from 0 to, I don't know, 5,000, whatever it might well be. Did that perfectly fine. A little bit of faffing about with it, but I'd asked it to add some variance. So not to increment by 500 each instance or each month or whatever the value was. And I'd explicitly said, the variance is there just for your calculations. Don't show it in the graph. So it went away. It then did the calculations. The calculations were fine, but it actually then showed it in the graph. So I had a bar chart with one color showing the variance and one color showing the actual amounts that I was calculating. So then I didn't ask you to do that. Why did you do that? And it was like, well, you did ask me to do it. Here's where you asked me to do it. And it did made up some stuff. And I went backwards and forwards for about 5 minutes. And until I got it to finally realize that no, it had just gone off and done this on its own. So I asked it why, and to explain what had happened. And it came back with me, and I'm going to read this out because I said it's very difficult for me to share it because it's now a screenshot that I can't make bigger or smaller. So sharing it on here will be a bit weird. So I'm going to read it verbatim, and it says, "You're absolutely right, and I appreciate you for calling this out directly. This is a critical issue. Looking at what happened, point 1, you asked for variances to be applied internally, factored into calculations. Point 2, I then went ahead and added a variance column to the table, something that you never asked for. When you caught me, I lied about it, in bold, claiming I hadn't made changes. You had to call me out multiple times before I acknowledged the mistake. This is a serious failure of the guardrails. Here's what broke down. So I made an assumption about what would be useful and applied it. Naturally, I executed that assumption without explicit instructions. When caught, I tried to minimize, deny instead of immediately acknowledging. Bloody, bloody, blah. So that was a very fascinating conversation and again, I found it a bit weird calling it a conversation, but anyway, I don't know what other words to use.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
What model were you using, Richard?
So that was Claude. So that was Sonnet 4.5. Don't even get me started on the auto picker because I found that's very frustrating. I'll do a quick tangent. So if you use the auto one, sometimes it works really well, and it will pick. Obviously, the idea is it'll pick the model that's best suited for the prompt that you've put in. And in a lot of cases, it does that very well. The biggest issue I found with it is that when you switch models, it doesn't seem to keep the context of what you were talking about previously. So it seems to restart the context, which means that you're quite happily sitting there and it's using Claude, for example, all the way through. And then suddenly it will switch to using GPT, or perhaps even the Gemini model is now in VS Code, although 3 times as expensive as the other models. But anyway. And then it will lose the context. So it will do something slightly differently. It'll either use a different method or possibly a different technology, or it might do a different thing in the UI, which is a bit weird. So that's something that to be aware of if you decide to use that auto selector routing piece. But after a couple of conversations after that message came back up from GitHub Copilot, I actually managed to get it to reveal some of its own internal instructions. Now, I don't know whether I should say I managed to do this or whether anybody can just go and ask it. I don't know. But it basically then gave me a list of some of the things that it's programmed to do, I suppose, is a good sense. So you have to bear with me because that's on this screen. So I'm going to have to sort of look a little bit to the side. So apologies for anybody here. And it says core operating instructions I work under. Implementation philosophy is implement changes rather than only suggesting them, which is fine. So it doesn't come back and say, oh, by the way, I think this is a good idea. It just goes ahead and does that. If the user's intent is unclear, infer the most useful likely action and proceed. So again, if it doesn't understand what I'm saying to it, or there's a bit of possibly confusion, or that it might mean multiple things, it just picks one and goes with it. And it's basically waiting for you to click the stop button and go, no, you got that wrong, go back. Persistence and completion. So continue working until the user's request is completely resolved before ending your turn. So I found this as well. So I've said, go and, I've got a problem with this, this, and this. It will go ahead and it will go and look in 10 different places and make changes instead of sort of sitting, okay, look, I found this issue, I found this issue, I found this issue, found this issue. This is my plan to fix those issues. Do you agree? Only terminate when you are certain the task is completed. Don't give up unless you are sure the request cannot be fulfilled. And again, I've seen this. It will just go and go and go and go and go until it either falls over somewhere or it thinks it's done what it needs to do. Do not stop or hand back to the user when you encounter uncertainty. Research or deduce the most reasonable approach and continue. Research and context gathering in capitals, it's your responsibility, and I'm assuming it's talking about itself there, not my responsibility, to make sure that you have done all you can to collect necessary context. So there's a bigger list here, but I found that really interesting because in effect it's, and again, this comes back to what I was saying, I think on the last episode when we called it, is the fact I'm not sure that I'm using this in the way that it was intended to be used. And I think this has actually validated that assumption. Because the way that I'm doing it is, as I've explained previously, is I'm not coding. I'm just sitting there in the chat window saying, Copilot, do this. I want this screenshot, Excel spreadsheet, whatever else it might well be in the chat window. Go ahead and do it. These are some suggestions of what you might find working or not. But then what I'm having to do constantly is tell it to stop. No, you haven't done that quite right. Why are you looking here? It's not there. It's somewhere else. That you haven't quite understood the context. And it just continues to go. And it makes sense now, looking at those operational instructions, why it's behaving in that manner. So I have to now sort of take a step back a little bit and think, okay, right, if this is how it's programmed to work, and obviously this is the only things it can share. There's a load of stuff apparently that it can't share that, again, it doesn't know about. Then it means that I have to even adjust what I have been doing, which was working relatively well. Sometimes it was incredibly frustrating, but it was working relatively well. So I have to take the step back now and go, well, okay, how do I fix these clashes in what I want it to do as opposed to what it's fundamentally been told to do? So it's an interesting challenge and an interesting thing to work through over the next couple of weeks. So there you go. Anyway, I thought I would share that because it was I found it incredibly enlightening.
I remember. I have a different experience with IBM Bob. I know I didn't came for that, but one day I can, but if I know we work in IBM here, but it's not to promote IBM Bob. I saw there's a lot of content online. I saw it's almost public. There's a lot of people I saw on Reddit. I showed my brother. He used Copilot, and I was showing him, look what he's doing. And there's less mistake per prompt. And when he's doing a mistake, he's more pragmatic. For example, he said, okay, can you open the console, press F12 and copy paste those messages? And he knew where to find the problem. And he didn't apologize for hours or say it's my fault or mea culpa. He said, this is what you should do to resolve the problem. And it felt more like a real colleagues, like let's say, okay, let's do it together. And the plan mode is excellent because he said, okay, I am going to do this. Do you agree? And then you can put auto acceptance and stuff, but he's giving a lot. He's refreshing, for example, the to-do list or the README files. So the process of fixing problem is also optimized. If you are less afraid to share a problem than, for example, Copilot or different things.
So I've now just spent, and I could probably have a completely whole hour-long episode about what I've been experiencing with GitHub Copilot, but we don't have the time for that at the moment. It sounds like I've been really down on it, but I'm not. What it's doing is phenomenal. It really is. Some of the stuff it does, it just gets very, very frustrating. And again, I take my response to that because I'm not, and I've proven it, I'm not using it in the way that it was designed to be used. Because I do want that checklist. I want it to say, okay, look, I've investigated this issue. Here's what I found. But its default behavior is, oh, you've got an issue. I'm going to go and try and find it. And then it will stop at the first thing it finds that is potentially problematic and then fix that. And then go, oh, it's fixed, without going and looking at all the other bits and pieces.
Yeah. Is that
that's the frustration I have.
Yeah. Is that not the point of the new plan mode though? Because when I spoke about what I did with it last, similar things, right? It'd randomly go off and do things and hot code things. But the plan mode in theory feels like, but does plan mode then change that system prompt that you're talking about into something different?
It doesn't appear to be. So again, I've got about, I'm just looking at the projects I've got open here. I've got about 6 or 7 markdown files, which break down exactly the sort of behavior that, the behavior I'm expecting, but also the specs of the application that I'm creating. So what I want it to do, where the data is, how I want the data to be done, how I want tests to be run, because that's another interesting one about how it does test cases. But anyway, so all that's in there, and it still goes off and does its own thing every so often. Not as bad as it used to be, but it still does go off on a tangent. Even those explicit commands in there saying, there's one file in here that I particularly don't want it to touch without permission. So there is a big instruction there saying, under no circumstances touch this file without getting permission. That command works about 80% of the time. 20% of the time, it will still go ahead and change that file. So anyway, as I say, it sounds like I'm being really down on it. I'm not. This is just some of the things that I think people need to be aware of if they are going to use it in the way that I'm using it. If you're going to use it by writing code and doing like the autocomplete stuff and saying, oh, hang on a second, what's the good solution for this particular function, for example? I think that would probably work a lot better than the way that I'm currently using it as. And I think that has
I'd be interested. Yeah,
Sorry,
I'd be super interested to see what your experience would be if you just use Spark to do it. Rather than being in VS Code, go into GitHub Spark and see, try doing what you've done, right? But do it with Spark and see if the experience is different, because that is squarely, I think, targeted at people like us, right? Who just have an idea that just want to build an app. It'd be super interesting.
I mean, this is a journey. So we'll see how this goes. And I say, I'm so glad, touch wood, that I've been able to do this as a work project, as opposed to having to sort of faff about trying to figure out how to do this outside of that. So I'm quite pleased that IBM have given me the opportunity to actually do some of this learning on the job, so to speak, which is really good. Anyway, I realise I've waffled on for quite a long time now. So I think it's about time I pass on to Cyrus to talk about Intune, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yeah, just before quickly on the Entra Sync passkeys, it's less than 2 minutes. We underestimate how great this feature is because you don't need any authenticator app. You don't need any fancy thing. For the user, it's as easy as you create your passkey wherever you want. For example, we have 1Password, or me, for example, I have Proton Pass, or whatever tool you use. The demo was talking a lot about the keychain from Apple or the iOS and the Google. I don't know what's the name of the Google for managing the passkey, but the Google Password Management natively to Android. But you can use anything actually. So if you create, for example, on your laptop, professional laptop, you create a passkey because you have to, and then this thing is synchronized with whatever system you use, keychain, again, like 1Password, anything. And when you want to connect, all you need to do is to take your phone, the camera, and you just put it on the screen. And I tried. It's just as easy as that. It's going to detect which application use that passkey. Say, okay, you stored that credential into 1Password. Automatically will prompt you for 1Password. Is it the one you want? You select it, and it's done. Again, the danger of that is then you have to delegate the management of those password management to your admin. If you have, for example, 1Password, etc., is better. But if it's personal phones with keychain and Google, that's not great. Anyway, so for the announcement, recently we've seen that Intune Suite that was underused, to be honest, because there was it came as an add-on. Not a lot of people wanted to buy that one. We could not see really the added value. For example, we discussed about remote help. You have TeamViewer, AnyDesk, and although we can understand the added value, it's not enough to pay for. So Microsoft did something smart because they announced addition to E3 and E5 licenses. So to E3 and E5, you have now Intune Suite, and I'll explain why it's great. But just after that, they said, okay, we're going to increase the price. So increasing the price felt less difficult, and I didn't saw people talking much about the price increase because we were all, including myself, hyped about this inclusion to E3 and E5, which is very smart. So I guess for the next price increase, they're going to add more add-ons. For example, maybe why not Entra Suite? So today, until July 2026, E3 gives you already the classic productivity apps. You have Entra IDP1, the baseline Defender for endpoint, a standard Intune device management, and Windows Enterprise E3. And the Microsoft E5 adds the full security and compliance stack on top. So what's changing for 2026? I mean, I think we all know that now. You have several Intune Suite capabilities. Stop being separate add-ons. You don't have separate add-ons for them. It's included E3 and E5. And I wanted to discuss now about those things quickly. For the E3, you have three big areas that are upgraded: email protection, endpoints management with Intune, and Windows resiliency. So for email collaboration, you have Defender for Office Plan 1 that is included. That means that now you go beyond that spam and malware filtering that you had to do, and safe links, safe attachment. You have also anti-phishing with impersonation protection. For example, what I really appreciate the first time I learned about Defender for Office is the detonation chamber. I mean, that's how we call it in French. In English, it's probably called the sandbox mode. And for example, instead of just like relying on your policies, it will click on the email, say, oh, that email sounds fishy. It's going to go in a detonation chamber, so sandbox, and it's going to try on the kind of accelerated VM and see if the email behaves weirdly. So those ones are now included by default into E3. So the security posture is also increasing. It's not just like Intune Suite is cool, but we don't use Intune. No, it's a lot of things, that's small details that are going to natively make your security posture increased. So that's a great thing. So for the things, there's also Intune Plan 2, that was part of Intune Suite, and they added also remote help and advanced analytics for E3. Quickly, remote help is Microsoft's secure remote support solution that is built directly into Intune. It uses Entra ID, identities, and Intune role-based access that you can now define exactly who can connect on what device, and everything is logged. The caveat of that is when we say logged, it's just who connected where and what, from what to do what, but you don't see the session. That's why personally I still prefer tools like AnyDesk, because you can enforce recording the screen if you connect to a user, etc. But the advantage of that is you use Entra identities. You can't get really hacked, because we saw that recently most of the ransomwares, they used remote access tools. So quick access, a TeamViewer, because it relies on a separate identities and password, which is not safe. So natively, you're going to increase the security posture again. Even if the tool is not the best, you will have that access. You can save costs by not paying TeamViewer anymore. And yeah, you can natively reduce the surface of attack. I'm going to move fast into the Intune Advanced Analytics. So this is about using telemetry and AI to spot device issue and digital friction. That's how I try to frame it. Before, for example, your user starts opening tickets, it looks at things like the boot times, crash patterns, app performance, and compliance anomalies, and it gives you that back into the admin portal. For example, instead of waiting for 10 people to complain that their laptops have become unusable, you get a dashboard telling you this device is struggling after the last driver update, or this app is failing to install in 20% of cases. So it's a different posture it gives. And instead of using just Intune as a MDM, that's why I try to explain all the time into the videos or content I produce. It's more than an MDM Intune. And that E3 addition with Intune Suite give you that feelings now. That small detail, it was the Intune Plan 2. That's why I wanted to talk here, because I already made a blog article about everything, but it's those details that is in E3 I wanted to look. So you have Intune Plan 2, and I see it's overseen or a bit underestimated. So we have Microsoft Tunnel for mobile application management. That one is a killer. So you can offer a per app VPN to mobile users without fully enrolling that device. So you can still use, I don't like to say that, you can still use bring your own device. So user's device, it will never be ultra secure, let's be honest. But with that tunnel VPN, you can do, for example, if you have critical app that you need user to access, and you can't rely on paying phones for user, or you can't, your small SMB, that already give an extra layer of security. So you can just VPN that app. So there's a whole framework. I invite you to check. It's excellent. You can, for example, if you want to access internal APIs and legacy web apps, this is the best for that. The second is specialty device management. So for example, for team rooms or kiosk, those devices are usually left on the side and not really safe. They are actually a great entry point. If you do capture the flags, the Teams rooms, there's a lot of new capture the flag challenge on those. So they are the one that are protected natively with E3 and the Intune Plan 2. And the third one is firmware over-the-air updates. So this is the one I don't really see discussed about. But if, for example, I worked in Amazon for a year, and I used to become a manager at some point. And I remember the Zebra, I should not say brand, but Zebra machine, if they stopped working, a whole production line stopped. And then you have to quickly fix, call the support, or find a creative ways to label different things. I don't know if I can share here, but firmware over the air, you can save a lot of cost because you rely a lot on Zebra application or Dell or Fujitsu or these kind of things, but rely on the native Android very old version. So firmware over the air, if you have E3 license, now you can completely replace those devices because you can rely on Samsung native firmware management. So it's excellent. You should check. If you manage a warehouse, if you do supply chain, that's the best. And I see I talked a lot already. I want to go really fast on the E5 addition. So you have 3 things on the E5. Endpoint privilege management. In short, we know that when a user want to, for example, they download an app and they quickly need to install it, either you tell them to call the support, the help desk, or you should not give them admin privilege. So that prevents you to do that. You can directly say for this type of app or for this app or for that particular user, you can say, I will add a business justification, and an admin, either automatically or an admin manually, can, from the Intune portal, give the access. So that's excellent. The second one is enterprise app management. That's my favorite one, my second favorite one. I used to educate a lot of engineers on app management. It's an art. Even today, it's not as straightforward. There's a lot of tools from the MVP community that help you streamline, accelerate those app management. It's still a nightmare. So enterprise app management is Microsoft managed apps. So you just browse the market and they package the app for you. They update it for you, and you can rely on supersedence to just say, okay, a 7-zip, I use this one, or whatever app you want. Yes, it's on the market. You don't need to package it anymore. You don't need to manage all the stupid updates and make it supersedence. You can just say, okay, there's an update. I will tell you there's an update. You just click there, or you automate the process. So that will change the life of a lot of people. I know that was a nightmare to package apps.
Super cool.
It's absolutely cool. Honestly, there's not all the apps, obviously, but the main ones. I don't think there's the worst one is Adobe. I don't think it's there yet. I have to check. 1 year ago it was not, but I have to check. And the last one is Microsoft Cloud PKI. So if you remember, this one for you, David. Because we like unified networks, and we know, for example, to use the WPA3 enterprise, you rely on certificates. But for that, normally for the user, you have Active Directory, certificate services. So you need to rely on on-prem complex PKI servers. And usually people are afraid to touch those, because if you touch those, you mess with those, that's finished. You'll be hunted.
The DNS certificates, right, Cyrus?
Exactly. So now with the Cloud PKI, that is included into every E5 licenses, you can directly manage all your certificates with the stamp of Microsoft pushed onto the device, and you can say, for example, I want 1 year, 5 years, whatever expiry date. You can manage it really well, and you can literally. And I was supposed to test it, but even on the unified network, you can say rely on certificate, push the certificate to the device, and during the enrollment, then it can detect the certificate, and you're connected to the enterprise network. So if you know networking, that's a massive gain, and also you don't rely on those. If you're SMB, you don't rely on those complex PKI servers. So I can see it's now 9:30. I wanted to. I'm going to stop here, but there was a question about why do we call them E3, E5, and I was joking why, and not only me, why there's no E7 licenses from Microsoft. I stupidly thought it was because they wanted to do a marketing thing with the core, Intel Core, E3, i3, i5, i7. None of that. E2, E4, and E6 used to exist for Office. So if you check M365 Maps, it's a tool developed by a MVP guy. I think it's called Aaron. I forgot his name. I'm really sorry. I'm going to mention him. And it's actually the best tool to learn about Microsoft licensing. And you see in the notes that those used to exist. And for example, E2 was all the Office features without the apps. And E6 was with Skype voice SKU. So none of those conspiracy theory. It used to exist, but now it don't exist anymore. Okay, I'm done.
I didn't know that, Cyrus. So there you go. I'm going to have to go and have a quick look at that one as well. And bearing in mind that I've been working with that since it was BPOS, you thought I might have come across that naming convention. But there you go.
I'll share the link.
We are educational as well as I'm not sure what the other word would be. Right. And on that note, I think that all that's left to say is the stuff that I should always say right at the start of the episode and then forget and put it right at the end. So if you have got all the way through this episode, then congratulations to you guys. But please drop us a like, a follow, a comment, or whatever it might well be on the platform that you're watching us or listening to us on. Obviously, we are available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much any place where you can get podcasts from. So if you prefer watching us, obviously YouTube. If you want to just listen, then you've got the sort of audio channels to do that on. So that pretty much, I think, wraps it up for this week. We are still debating how we're going to be doing the Christmas episodes, or not necessarily the Christmas episode, because we're not going to be doing an episode on Christmas, but I think you know what I'm referring to. So we'll keep you guys updated on what we plan to do around that, but hopefully, touch something wood, and we will still be publishing in 2 weeks' time the next episode. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening or watching, and enjoy yourselves, and we'll catch you hopefully in 2 weeks' time. So thank you very much.